Welcome everybody. Hi, I'm Stacey Bobiel. I'm Portal's Program Manager and I'll be assisting behind the scenes this morning, monitoring the tech and monitoring your questions as well. You've just been listening to Flight of the Eagle performed by Norm Jadawar Stanley. And so, yeah, it was a lovely way to start the session today. You've all been automatically muted upon entry, so please remain muted and keep your camera off for the duration to ensure the best connection is possible for everyone. This will limit distractions as well, including your hosts. So if you experience any tech difficulties or get thrown out during the session due to a bad connection, please click on the Zoom link that you've been sent already to join the conversation again, and we'll bring you back in. If your technical problems remain unresolved, we are recording this session and it will be made available via the Surf Coast Shire YouTube channel and the surfcoastartstrail.com.au. Okay, lastly, if I can get everyone, everyone's already been chatting with us, so that's been great. But yeah, towards the end of the session, we're going to open the discussion up to questions. So please use the chat function to type your question and we'll collate them and we'll read them out to our hosts towards the end of the session. So thank you everyone for joining us this morning and welcome to Journey on Wadawurrung Country.
Good morning, I'm Councillor Rose Hodge, Mayor of the Surf Coast Shire. Welcome to Journey on Wadawurrung Country. The Surf Coast Shire proudly acknowledges the Gulidjan and the Gadiba peoples of the Eastern Maar and Wadawurrung as the traditional custodians of the Surf Coast Shire region. We pay our respects to their ancestors and elders, past, present and emerging. As the oldest living culture on earth, we recognise and uphold their relationship to their traditional lands. We're delighted to have you tuned in for this Sunday session event as part of Portal. Thank you to Wadawurrung traditional owner Corrina Eccles and collaborator and photographic artist Ferne Millen. These women will take a virtual walk on country. Corrina will discuss the significance of relationship to place, land, rivers and sea, and how this relationship informs every aspect of life. Locally, we know that our First People story can be understood better. We can help educate and heal to benefit both our First Nation people and the community. We are committed to helping non-Aboriginal people better understand our Aboriginal cultural heritage and how important it is. We hope that events like today's will help to achieve this goal. I will now hand over to Corrina, who will use the traditional method of smoking ceremony to cleanse the space for the discussion.
acknowledge all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that may be viewing this today. I'm now going to welcome you with the mother tongue of the Wadawurrung people, the mother tongue that belongs to this mother and belongs to this country, the mother tongue that my people, my bloodline, my ancestors spoke for many generations. Moon Bengari, Kinkin Bill, Wedigaranguli, Wadawurrung, Nalingu Wikimbani, Wadawurrung Ja, Unani Dulama Bengarapa, Gayukin Guma, Maradop, Makbari. Kimbani Wadawurrung Ja, Gayukin Guma Wadawurrung Ja, Kulumadanao, Kubada Wadawurrung Ja. I say, welcome to Wadawurrung Country. You are gathered on Wadawurrung Country. Let's walk together on Wadawurrung Country. May you take care of Wadawurrung Country. Yatni, thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to Portal. My name's Harriet Gaffney, and this is the second of our Sunday morning sessions, Journey on Wadawurrung Country with Corrina Eccles and Ferne Millen. Apologies for the sound quality, people. It's multiple different inputs coming into Zoom, so that was very unfortunate, but anyway, as I said, I'm the Artistic Director of Portal and the Arts Development Officer for the Surf Coast Shire. This session is being brought to you live from Wadawurrung Country here on Victoria's Surf Coast. We acknowledge the Wadawurrung as the traditional owners and protectors of this place, the first creators on country and of country. We acknowledge their ancestors who cared for the land, rivers and sea and all things living for thousands of generations. We pay our respects to elders past, present and future who continue on this path. Portal's July series of Sunday morning sessions focuses on the intimate space of the conversation. Each one is led by one of the many women in the Shire's arts and cultural life. Today's session is about a relationship that began as professional respect between Corrina Eccles, a highly admired Wadawurrung cultural ambassador who has enriched our understanding of where we live hugely, and Surf Coast photographer Ferne Millen, before growing into friendship and now, 10 years on, into a creative collaboration exploring what it means to journey on Wadawurrung Country. Before I move on, I just want to encourage you, the audience, to express your thoughts about the session via the chat function at the bottom of your screen. We're collating the feedback and I'll be using it when I think about future arts and culture programming at Council. So it's a really good opportunity to let us know what you want more of. We'll also be inviting questions from the audience at the end of today's session. So as Stacey's already said, if you've got any questions for our presenters, please note them down, type them into the chat function and Stacey will collate them behind the scenes. Now to our guests. Corrina is a passionate Wadawurrung woman with 22 years experience in Aboriginal organisations and community engagement, advocacy, cultural values, support and connection. She is one of 5 generations living on Wadawurrung Country and is the granddaughter of Auntie Joyce Eccles. Corrina is currently the Cultural Education Officer and Office Manager for the Wadawurrung Aboriginal Corporation in Geelong. Our second guest today is an artist whose photography has won her much acclaim both locally and further afield, Ferne Millen. Ferne's CV demonstrates quite clearly her passions and themes. She's done album covers and sleeve shots for Neil Murray, Archie Roach and Shane Howard, musicians that have led the fight for reconciliation and justice for Aboriginal Australians for more than 40 years. She was the photographer for the Sea Shepherd's 30th anniversary benefit in California in 2006. And it was Ferne's portrait of Archie Roach that Ai Weiwei used as his centrepiece work for the Andy Warhol Ai Weiwei exhibition at the National Gallery of Victoria in 2016. So firstly, now that we've got all of that done, I want to thank you both so much for sharing your project with us. Before we dive into the first products from the show or from the project, the photographs that you've completed for the pilot, Ferne, I'd like us just to, explore a little bit of background on you both, if that's okay. So Corrina, I'll begin with you. As a Wadawurrung woman born on country, where did your journey begin?
Before I go into that, I just want to acknowledge all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, elders past, present, and our future generations that might be zoomed in today and listening. I say Yatni, thank you for everyone that's joined in today and listening to this journey. So me, about my own journey, as a Wadawurrung woman that I can now proudly say, I use the words that Auntie Colleen Howe uses, and we'll hear a little bit about that story a little bit later, but who am I and where I belong was not something that I grew up knowing, and it was not something that all my generations of family before me were able to stand strong and proud, connected to the land of their bloodline and say who they were and where they belonged with what's taken place in the past history. So I took myself on a journey. I had many struggles as a young girl. The colour of my skin, I was constantly teased and challenged about, and being told as a young child I was horrible. And that's why I did have the darkest colour skin and that my nan was. I didn't know anything else about that. And now that I'm older and can really reflect, I understand the spirituality, I understand connection to country. There's so much now that I understand more that you don't as a young child. There's always something about you. And I say the word like I had a hole in my heart, and culture has been the healing to that hole, and country has been the healing to that hole. So I started my own journey, and I actually went through the Koori Heritage Trust to find family records. And my journey has been my own journey of walking country, listening to country, which I understand now, became more in depth for me when I became a mum for the first time. I wanted my children to know who they were and where they belonged, and a journey. So that took, and that's what, really at that age increased my journey. I had a very strong Aboriginal grandmother, but her voice remained silent a lot of times. And walking into my nan's gorgeous little home, and there's photos of Kathy Freeman and crocheted tissue box covers. Everything was red, black and yellow. And my nan told me my first language name, and it was after having a conversation about being picked on about the colour of my skin, and she said to him, if they say that, you just call them this word. And she said that word, and it was the word gubba. And I said, what does it mean, Nan? She said, you don't need to know that. That's just what you say. I'm glad I didn't say that word at the time. I know what that means now. But, I felt my nan, my nan was my strength, and that journey has grown. But it's a journey that's so strongly connected, to my bloodline, connected to this country, because we are the people of this country, and this is our mother. Yeah. And she cares for us, and we, in return, care for her.
I'm going to come back to that because I think that's the major theme that's running through this project, is this recognition of the land, the earth as our mother. But Ferne, I'll come back to you because you likewise were born on Wadawurrung Country. How did this journey begin for you? And, was it something that you always knew about? Did you always know that you were born on Wadawurrung Country?
Firstly, I would like to acknowledge all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders that join us here today, and also all the community that come together to share our stories. Yatni, which is thank you in Wadawurrung, is thank you, Corrina, for sharing your story and taking this journey with me and Harriet today. As a young girl, I was very encouraged by my mum as an artist and my father a sociologist to see the world through my own eyes. I was encouraged to feel into that space, to acknowledge the feeling that gave me, and I always had a really deep spiritual connection to country. I don't know what you call it, innate, a feeling of just wanting to explore the world. And fortunately, at the age of 15, I was given a camera, and that was like my vehicle to kind of move in and out and weave in between people's stories, capturing those stories and putting them into a place which can be received by others, not through my words, but through my photos. Mm-hmm. So I feel like I've been very lucky and nurtured in that space to kind of explore that, and never seeing the colour of skin, never seeing, the irony is, someone that's a visual artist, it's something deeper beyond the surface that I wanted to get to. Mm-hmm. And so we see the surface of what we see in the world, our skin, our face, our beauty, and all those elements that makes us human. But there's something beyond that that I see through the lens, or something, and I've wanted to capture in sound, in word, in music especially, and the combination of elements that brings us to a place that we all can really relate to, archetype, sort of way, as a human. And as a human, we have this archetypal connection to the elements that we live in, that we grow up on. And growing up on Wadawurrung Country in Geelong, in Skene Street, Newtown, I had a very, a very privileged upbringing. And there's been moments through this process where I feel like, a little bit ashamed and not wanting to explore that, because I'm a white woman and I feel privileged growing up. But I'm very fortunate and I'm grateful to my parents, my father, a sociologist who began at Deakin Uni in 74, who taught me to see people for who they are and hear them and listen to them and discover their cultural background and research who they are. Yeah.
I'll stop because I think it's a great idea. Maybe Stacey will flick to the first image. And so what we'll do is we'll use those images to sort of guide us through this journey on country. So Stace, when you pull that image up for us, so we'll look at the details of those works if we may. And we'll start I'm really interested in starting at the top of this image with Corrina, Ferne, because you have Corrina wrapped in smoke. And it was something when I first saw this image, I was reminded recently when watching the extraordinary film that's screening right now on ABC iView, everyone. I do encourage you to watch it if you haven't, In My Blood It Runs. In it, the protagonist, Juan, says, I was born with a memory. Juan's 11 years old. He's born in town camps in Alice Springs in Hidden Valley. But he says, I was born with a memory. And for me, this image really evokes the deep time of Aboriginal relationship to country. So, Corrina, I'm wondering if, I think we'll move backwards and forwards between the pair of you talking about these images as we go through. So what's the significance of fire on country? And why is smoke, as we have this morning? In fact, obviously our video this morning of the smoking was taken earlier. However, we did smoke this space for this event today. So why is smoke used at the beginning of significant events, births, deaths, anything of significance really? What's its place in the Aboriginal worldview?
Yeah, fire is a significant cultural tradition to country, and it's really important. Many people fear fire. Mm-hmm. They fear fire, but fire today is different what fire was for our people. So the word for fire in Wadawurrung language is wind, mm-hmm. and fire was used to cleanse country. Fire was used for our smoking ceremonies to cleanse people. So when you invited, our messenger went over on another country and you invited them to come over on country, you would have your fire going, and you would then place, we use the cherry ballad and the eucalypt, and you would smoke your visitors, because the country past our boundary of Wadawurrung Country, it's a different country. So like people leave Australia and there's certain things you can bring in and out. So we would cleanse from the feet, we'd cleanse through the spirit. So we know that any bad spirit that may have come with them, that we were cleansing and getting rid of that. It also lets our murups, our ancestors, our spirits know, and Bonjour, our creator being, know that we have people on country. And then me and Ferne started this journey when I came here for the first time to start this project. And like we'll start and we'll cleanse each other and we'll cleanse the space. And this photo come from bringing the smoke through here. It wasn't, we did not set up to take this portrait. It was not at all. And this came as I was coming through, you know, where we sit today, smoking and cleansing this area. And I talk about, as we went on that journey and everything we went on together, I would share with Ferne as we went and what we were doing as well. So fire is really, really important. We need to look at fire to be caring better for country. And as a Wadawurrung woman, I have many Wadawurrung family members that lead the way with traditional fire burning. And our future aspiration is that we will hold a very strong Wadawurrung traditional fire burning team and be able to look after country how our generations of our family have for many, many, many generations. Fire is really significant to our people, to us. And our spirit is like fire within us internally.
Yeah, beautiful. How does it, so when you, Ferne, when you were taking this, like this shot in many ways, you know, you mentioned before you open up the space for the images to occur. When you saw this one, after you first took it, how did it strike you about what you captured?
That moment in time was a meeting place. That meeting place was cleansed between Corrina and I. Quite often a photograph in the artistic practice is two people or many people and the photographer coming to a place that's a meeting in the middle. A bit like what Corrina talked about in the ritual sense of having a fire and bringing people together. That moment is, you know.
So we've all just
distracted by
Wah in Wah the crow. This is the trickster who carried fire. Is that right, Corrina?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, there's many stories connected to Wah and country, you know, being the two Maoris with Wadawurrung.
Yeah. As my studio faces west in Janja, we have lots of nature outside the studio door and we're seeing Wah waddle around under the princess gums.
And we've all got goosebumps because it's, you know, just that, oh, there he is. You know, we were here yesterday, we didn't see him. But we'll come back.
Yeah, the photo, in fact, was quite a challenging time for us all during the COVID-19 as we went into a space. And I was sort of thinking, we've been trying to work towards this project for over a year. And the City of Melbourne had a COVID-19 arts grant, which I applied for, successfully received, and began this pilot project, which was essentially to start with Corrina and then expand into Wadawurrung Country and to get the stories and accounts of many, many Wadawurrung people for the final exhibition in the future. So this moment was also, for me, I knew, and after many years talking to Corrina about smoking, about cleansing the air, we gathered those gum leaves. We got that cherry balat together from the creek behind my house. We brought that in, smoking it in through the studio, and in ceremony, we cleansed the space. And it was very important at this moment in time with the COVID pandemic, because there is a lot that can be learned from Indigenous culture about the country that we live in, about the plants, about what we can do to heal the people from our land. And that for me is all of that. And I didn't want to take that photo. I'd set it up to do a video and record the sound, and the crackling is beautiful, like silver crackling sounds. But I really know that smoke means more, and it's something, it's touchable, but it's also achievable by us all. But there's something magical and mystical and spiritual in it.
I mean, I think what's really interesting about this image, and we will move on in a second, Stace, but I think in particular with this image, what's really interesting is that you talk about the fact that the use of smoke to create space for ceremony is about people bringing people into a moment where everything else is forgotten. There's a timeless quality about it. And this image too is timeless. And I'm going to say, I'm going to mention again something that Joanne said in My Blood It Runs, because I think that there's very interesting parallels in these stories. And what he says is this 11-year-old is that he says he was born with a memory. And to me, this image really beautifully talks about ancestral memory, and in fact that there's a timelessness to this image. This could have been, if we had cameras 40,000 years ago, this image is throughout time in this country, in this place, and that's what's so beautiful. We might move to the second image now, Stacey, if we could. So this is Norm Gerald Stanley, who played the Didge at the beginning, and anyone who's been privileged enough to be at any events where Corrina has done the Welcome to Country, etc. Norm is often there beside her with the Didge. So this film that I'm referencing, and I will stop referencing it, but this film that I'm referencing had not yet been released when this Journey on Wadawurrung Country project was begun. Ferne, what were you hoping when you first went in to this project? What were you hoping to capture? What was was there an objective?
And I think, Corrina, you probably agree with me on this. It's like sometimes you don't know why you're doing something, and it's just something that you do innately. But then through conference and connection as a friend, you get to see, what is it you do? And you realise you're providing a voice and you're creating, a sounding board for community, for your Wadawurrung community to be heard, to your voices to be heard, to be seen. And quite often there's this mystery of enshrouded by mystery, and people feel like they can't connect with Indigenous people because there might be a fear of asking the wrong thing or making the wrong statement. But I say, be free to ask. If it's done in kindness, if it's done in thoughtfulness, then there's nothing wrong with that. And so it is essentially providing a voice for my friends on country. And over time, through respect and acknowledgement and sharing our creative resources. I love to do shoots with Norm, and I give him those images. And I want to say Nyatni, Norm, if you're watching today, for providing us with that beautiful didgeridoo music at the start. And in return, I like to see that he is part of this connection too. We're all part of this family, and we can connect together and share the stories that we have.
Corrina, do you have anything further to add?
I think just to add, initially how this journey started, it was a conversation that we had with Ferne that, when you're asked where were you born, many people will say Geelong Hospital. But I want to educate every person to know where they were born on the traditional land. What was it? Where were you born? Wadawurrung Country. Where were you born? Bunditjamara Country. Where were you born? Going to where they're actually born, the country. And that is something we can start with education by starting to educate people in that way. But one thing particular, the conversation we had with Ferne is, where you live, you should know who your traditional owners are. It is something that we should be respecting. That particularly on Wadawurrung Country, we've only had one bloodline that survived this country. My grandfather, he left Wadawurrung Country, he went up into our country, and our bloodline survived. Now, we are survivors. We're the longest living bloodline. And for me, my nan, to share a bit later, I'll probably save that for later to share that image, but people should know this. You can go to other parts of the world and people are well aware of what the traditional land is, who the traditional people are, what the traditional language are, and who are the people, the traditional owners of the land. So Ferne had come to me and said, I want to put these images out there and people to recognise them. And, you know, they'd be approaching Wadawurrung people and it'd be in their space. So, you know, I had Auntie Marley Gilson and Deanne Gilson, absolutely beautiful Wadawurrung artists that use their art to tell Wadawurrung stories. You know, other cousins that are strongly connected to, you know, our water and strongly connected to fire, and, you know, picture them in their really strong spirit and connection element and have their photo up, and with that have a quote of their spirit and their Wadawurrung spirit and what it means to them, and that was what it was about. And because all people, they're the things that all people should know. Absolutely. And
look, I will say, Corrina, I think, you know, I've lived on Wadawurrung Country now for 10 years, and I think in that time, and when I first came, I came from Arunda Country, and we'll speak about Arunda. There's some Arunda people who will feature in this towards the end. However, so Arunda Country is the traditional owners of the Alice Springs region. And so I came here and I was actively always looking for, you know, I was living in Brimley, so there were middens and there were echidnas and black swans, and so I was living on country and I could see the people who'd lived there for thousands and thousands of years, and I could go and sit in the dunes and realise that if you were sitting in, you know, the huge middens in the second row of dunes back from the beach, that's where people had gone, and in the winter sun, you know, you were out of the wind and you could see the way they'd feasted and how these flourishing family groups, and yet I couldn't find any information really. And yet a decade later, you know, the work that you have done with the deadly dances and everything to educate us and to help us better understand what it is to be on Wadawurrung Country, and the pride as a nation, I feel that we are not allowing ourselves to really own, because we have the longest surviving culture on earth, and not only surviving, but that flourished until white settlement. We'll continue with the next image, if we may, Stacey. Sally Groom, if you're watching today, we're not going to talk too much about ochre and water. Stacey, have we got that next image? Thank you. We're not going to talk too much about ochre and water, but because, Sally, you're going to investigate that further with Corrina next week. However, this shot is entitled Smoke and Water. So what to you is significant, Ferne, about this one, and why does it form part of the project?
There's a place where the river meets the sea. It's down at Point Impossible. It's very close to where you were talking about the middens in Brimley, and I've always felt a spiritual connection to it. In the next few images, it captures the sense of space, the feeling that gives us when we're on country. There's something I wanted to know, something deeper that was beyond my knowledge. And I've always felt a deep connection to country in this space. And walking on country with Corrina, I felt so held. She held space for me. I created space for you, and we were able to meet in the middle and create this beautiful imagery. I don't really always have words for the photos. I think they can just speak for themselves. And the elements, water and fire.
And I think what's really interesting is that, I'll come to you in a second, Corrina, but I think it's really interesting, this two storytellers using different mediums meeting here. That's what I feel. You know, you're a visual storyteller, you tell story through song, dance, and your incredible eloquence, Corrina. We might move on to the next one.
Can I just talk a little about that one again?
Sorry, jump back, Stace. That was me jumping too far.
Sorry, I just want to share on that one because I had 3 things happening at once that morning. So this was not set up or staged at all. I was doing a live ceremony on country. So COVID has been extremely challenging. It has impacted enormously, you know, all Aboriginal people in this space that have cultural obligations with ceremony and sharing and education. We've been heavily impacted. All our ceremony bookings have been cancelled, and that is an income for traditional owners. As much as it's a cultural obligation, it is also an income. So we've been harshly. So how do you remain your cultural obligation, your cultural appropriateness of sharing orally. So I only chose a few to do live ceremonies out on country. And this morning I was doing this live ceremony and Ferne needed to catch up with me, and I'm like, Ferne, you'll have to meet me here while I'm doing this live ceremony. And of course, Ferne goes everywhere with a camera. And Ferne captured this shot. At the same time, though, I was also listening to a live Zoom because I'd been a finalist for the Surf Coast Cultural Walk. So there was 3 things happening here at this stage. But that just shows the essence of it. As a Wadawurrung woman, I can't stage this stuff. I cannot stage this, and Ferne is being able to capture it in the moment. And that is how the storytelling is being captured in the moment.
Yeah, and there's a real, that's what the images ring with, like authentic engagement, authentic, holding of what is occurring or who is being captured by the image. Shall we move to the next one? So for those of us on the Surf Coast, this image will speak to you. Corrina, would you talk to us a little bit about why we're...
Yeah, this is beautiful Wadawurrung coastline. So this is the area we're talking about, Brimley, Point Impossible. And for Wadawurrung people, this was a large place of permanent living and gathering for Wadawurrung people. And along this beautiful coastline, we have Millen sites, and all along that coastline, and some of the, the largest registered Millen sites in Victoria on coastlines. And it shows a large population of Wadawurrung people that lived, cared, nurtured, and were spiritually connected to this land for 60,000 years. And the evidence is still there. And that's where we need to educate people, because those sand dunes and this coastline, what you're seeing in those Millen sites are thousands and thousands of years old. And people that don't know that, we find that people are coming through, some of those Millen sites, to get down to the coast and running through sand dunes. Often you'll see people sliding down sand dunes, and it's absolutely heartbreaking when you see that. We have the issues of climate change that are affecting us as well, and a massive concern for our registered significant cultural sites as well. This coastline, Wadawurrung people walked along this coastline, from Barwon Heads, let's keep walking all the way down to Bells Beach, and, then you go up inland into beautiful Point Addis, and, the names I'm using are actually been replaced. There's Wadawurrung names for these places, and that's something as well that's been lost. Our language has been lost, and the original names of these places have been lost. And let's hope in time that we can return the Wadawurrung names, because with Wadawurrung language, it tells a story. So an example of Brim Creek, it has another name now, but when it's called Brim Creek, it means that there's brim there. So language tells you about that place and what's there in that place. But
and what so you'd know at this, and you would also have known the seasons that the brim would be there. So we're going to carafe, that's the traditional name.
Wetlands.
Yeah, and so that that movement of people, on country at the appropriate times when there's enough, to actually to feed people and keep people thriving.
And that place particularly was a place of plenty, because you're right, you have the wetlands, you have the fresh water, and you've got the salt water. So there you have your supermarket, you have your chemist, you have everything you absolutely need to live a sustainable life.
I find it, I'm going on a little bit of a tangent, but I find it, and Corrina, you might know this, because when I first came here, and I'd been living in sort of Central Australia for a long time, working with Aboriginal people from Central and Western deserts. So I came here and I was obsessed. I was absolutely living on Aboriginal country. Evidence of it was so obvious to me, and yet I couldn't find any information. We've come back to us.
Can you mist we saw in the image sort of reminds me of the mist when I'm taking on the beach that morning with bare feet, feeling grounded into that space. There's a lot of mist enshrouded in Indigenous culture and history, because the prehistory of what we don't know is still yet there for us to find out. And that's why this conversation needs to be had. That's
And
what
I
need
think
to say.
there's a fabulous academic who I, have an intellectual crush on called Paul Carter, and he talks about the literal spaces, like the spaces on the edge and in between built up roads and things. And in Wadawurrung Country, you can walk, if you get off the obvious paths and stuff, you can walk our beaches and know and learn. If you've got your eyes open and you're willing to, spend time, you can learn so much about what used to be here. And what is so beautifully being brought back through projects like this, I think, and recognising that it's not gone.
Walking on country
Walking
together.
our country.
Yeah.
That's where I came up with these grand ideas. Sorry, Corrina. But, that is why partially this project's involving getting into the studio to connect just with that individual, but also getting out onto country is very important.
And this is my education. So not having that history and knowledge passed down to me, I have had to, I'm connected to country. I don't watch TV. This is my TV. I will sit on this coastline of an evening and watch the sunset happen and the change, and it changes, and it's just like someone else sitting and watching TV for me. But I walk country because country is educating me.
Yeah.
And what I know is what I'm being educated by country.
And it's that fundamental, absolutely fundamental difference between sort of Western culture's ideas about what land is and something that you own, and Aboriginal relationship to country, which is that this is our mother and she looks after us, so we look after her, and that reciprocal relationship. We'll move on to the next image, please, Stace. My gorgeous Brimley, I do miss you. Giraffe. I mean, we are so incredibly blessed where we live.
Can I just go the image
Flick back?
Only because it relates to the next image. Because you can see the dancing waves at sunrise reflected in the next image, which is the dancing cloak. And the wind picked up just at that moment when Bunjil flew above us in circles.
Wow.
Out at the Yuyangs on Big Rock. And just as I caught that image, this was the only time we were standing on the rock together, Corrina, when it picked up the tails of the coat.
Yeah, and dance.
And again, this was not staged. I'm not an elder. I don't wear a cloak. This day was extremely cold and windy, and we'd gone out there to do some photographs. This was about 2 years ago. This actually was 2 years ago. And the cloak was down with the coolamon and things around it, and again doing an education session. And I was absolutely frozen. And I put the cloak around me for warmth, and the wind just come under and lifted the cloak. And it was later that Ferne said, look at this cloak, look what happened. So again, this was not staged, and I'm not an elder, I don't wear a cloak. It was about warmth, which this is what kept our people warm, The possum skin's the third warmest skin in the world, and for us to have this, for warmth as well. But what took place here is when Bunjil flew over, it was captured in a reflection in the water well.
Wow.
Can you tell us a little bit about that water well, Corrina?
Yeah, so again, many of you would have gone out to the Yuyangs, which we call Wadawurrung, and that water well was made by Wadawurrung people. They naturally grinded out that little hollow on the top of big rocks, so they always had fresh water. So this is where it's really, really important, and we you can look that story up, ABC Wadawurrung Mother Tongue, and it'll tell you that story that is shared by Uncle Brian Powell, a beautiful story. And that's the importance of understanding the story of the land and what it means. And I think if people are more educated to understand, it actually helps people to care for it better. So the best way I explain it is our country is our mother. And she cares and nurtures for us, but in return, we have to care and nurture for a mother, just like we do in our lives. But she is our mother, and she has mothered many generations, for thousands of years. But again, it wasn't staged, and it told us a beautiful story. And when we left that day, Bonjour continued to fly with us while we're driving in our car.
Yep. One of the things, I think it's really interesting that this project, that we're exploring this project right here, right now, you know, when we've started the year with the most extraordinarily terrible bushfire season that the country has ever seen, in fact, that the world has ever seen, and now we've gone into a, you know, global pandemic. So, you know, both of those things come from the fact that we haven't been looking after country, that we're far too concerned with consumption and what we can take from country rather than how we're actually living with country. And so it seems to me that now is a really incredibly important. Ferne is just rearranging the room. Don't worry, everyone.
It was calling me into the space because I felt I needed to come back to country.
Yes,
and create
indeed.
this beautiful gift today.
Indeed. Yeah, so this, you know, recognising, and I think again, we have a period, you know, we well may go back down into full-blown lockdown in Victoria, and it's our opportunity really to think and to stop and think, what can I do? How do I relate to country? What is my relationship with country?
Yeah.
We'll move to, so these things don't happen in isolation though. I mean, we've talked a little bit about bloodlines. Stacey, we might move to the next image.
Bloodline's very important here.
It is indeed. How many generations of Wadawurrung?
5 generations.
In the one photo.
Mhm.
Wow.
All living on Wadawurrung Country. Sorry, I might get emotional. So this is my beautiful grandmother, Auntie Joyce Eccles. Unfortunately, she had a stroke now about 20 years ago and has been in a nursing home at Lara since then. This was extremely hard, extremely hard to have a couple of months old. My granddaughter was only a couple of months old. Nan in her wheelchair that my dad could not manoeuvre. It was very scary.
Your dad and his beautiful
We had a lot
plate.
of wind blowing, and we had the skin to keep Nan warm, but Nan had hold of her blanket so tightly, which she does. But this is 5 generations of Wadawurrung. My Nan, 96 years of age, and my granddaughter too. This is rare in Victoria. This is rare to still have 5 generations on country. My family returned back to Wadawurrung Country. My Nan and my dad were born up in Warrnambool, and my Nan brought her children back here, and then Nan started her journey with many other family members, finding their way that they were Wadawurrung. And Nan found that out while living on Wadawurrung Country.
Wow.
And she brought her children back here.
Yeah.
And 5 generations still living on Wadawurrung Country, and we were also, the 5 generations was used as part of the treaty ads that also the beautiful Uncle Archie was part of as well. And unfortunately we couldn't have Nan involved, but I am blessed to have 5 generations here on country from 96 to now. I also have a second granddaughter who's only 6 weeks old. And
Thank you for giving into my crazy ideas.
Wow. So Ferne just said, I want to somehow capture it. And I'm like, how do we capture 5 generations? And Nan just kept looking over at my beautiful granddaughter, Elira, and looking at her and saying, I love you. I love you. I love you. She kept saying. And so I thank Ferne for capturing that. And I'm
just grateful for you giving
She's
into
our
my crazy ideas. I said, I'm just going to take her out the rock. I'm just going to go down to the nursing home.
When I say a matriarch, she's our queen. So from Nan had 10 children, and she now has over, I think we're up to about 78 grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and great-great-grandchildren.
Wow.
So when you're talking about cultural knowledge, if Nan was able to, which she's not unfortunately, if she was able to maintain being that educator, no school teacher would want 78 children in a classroom, do you know what I mean? So that's where it is really an obligation for all of us to learn, to be able to continue to teach the stories. Yeah,
it's really interesting. I think, you know, like one that so if your Nanny's 96 and she's grown up in sort of the most appalling sort of times of white sovereignty and racism, absolutely, like predominantly against Aboriginal people, and yet she so proudly holds to those markers, you know, the black, yellow and red, and, you know, still holding, and now finally, you know, hopefully we're seeing a shift so that you can stand and be proud of, you know, 5 generations of Wadawurrung people on country. Stacey, we might move to the next image. So we're going to have a look at some more generations of First Nations people on Wadawurrung Country.
Uphill.
So
Beautiful, deadly dances.
many of us will know the deadly dances. Corrina, how did the deadly dances come about? What's the importance of them?
Okay, so how did the deadly dances come about? Again, it had started, my children would be part of dancing with other Aboriginal children when they were quite little, and it was a very strong part of their identity in connecting to the wider community, the Wadawurrung wider community back, 18 years ago now. Then what took place, we had a growth of, I'd continued with my children, they'd grown out of it. I have cared for many other Aboriginal children, and I would connect them as well to that local dance group that was happening at the time. Then from that grew girls, and it grew, and it grew, and it grew. I think now I have over 20 girls in that group. And this image was International Women's Day. And again, Ferne was at that event on behalf of City Greater Geelong. Marsha, a very strong, sorry Marsha, if you're listening. Very strong woman, very strongly connected, very strong spirit. And she was coordinating this Women's Day event. And after we celebrated the ceremony, Ferne captured this photo. It is so strongly important. I talk about my own journey of not having a sense of belonging, not having the opportunity to do this. And these girls come together and they connect to each other. But it is also about leadership. So those older girls have responsibilities of helping get the young girls painted up with ochre and having that responsibility to lead them with the dancing and that as well. So dancing on country does only belong to the traditional owners of country. The dances these children do, because I only have a few that are Wadawurrung, we don't dance specific stories that our Wadawurrung traditional owners dance. We also, I was granted permission for that by elders, Wadawurrung elders many years ago, but I think my face says it all here.
Yeah, the joy.
You know, and as Aboriginal people, we carry, all children are our own children. And we care for each and every person, each and every family member, and each and every Aboriginal young person that is on this, living on Wadawurrung Country.
And can I say, the faces of those girls, it brings me so much joy, because I've seen many of them over a decade photographing them dance, and how much the dance has educated me to understand Wadawurrung Country and the people in it. And I thank you girls, all of you out there, for doing that for me and for everyone in our community, because your spirit, when I see you fly, when you dance, brings so much joy, and I love capturing you in that moment.
And I also want to say that these girls, although they are culturally safe in a culturally safe environment, but they are culturally safe with Ferne taking a photo too, and that's what is really important. From someone being behind a camera, they need to understand respect and cultural safety as well. And yeah, as you see there, you see strong Aboriginal girls. If you've seen them outside of that space, they'd be really, really shy. I also want to mention 2 of the dancers. We're going to hear their beautiful voices later, which is another way, you know, their spirit connects with song.
So let's just, for a moment, before we move on to the next image, so let's talk a little bit then for the audience, for those people who haven't had the, you know, the good fortune of spending time with you, Corrina, and things. What makes something culturally appropriate? If you've got a photographer there, in what way does Ferne act that makes her work, you know, that makes her be able to actually not control the situation, but just allow and to take exactly what's there, take the shot of exactly what's there?
Well, say in the space of being in a space, often when there's cameras and videos, we do always say that, you know, videoing, it's our oral sharing, should I say, that's really, really important. So we do ask that, you know, no video is taken of oral sharing. Many photographers will come along and snap, snap, snap. You've got to take time. You've got to consult, you've got to ask, and more importantly, you have to ask before you go releasing that into the media as well. You've got to ask, what are the words? That is our intellectual property. What we are sharing is thousands and thousands of years old as well. And it's also about as well. That's really, really important. So you must give time to build relationship. You must ask, you must consult. Don't be afraid to do that.
And I think that's a really important point, and it's going back to that point that Ferne made earlier. Ask. If you don't know, if you have fear, ask. Reach out and ask.
And my life is all more enriched, and all of ours are to have that connection and have that discussion, because you don't have someone rock up to your house and you don't ask them why they're there. You just say, what are you doing here? What are you up to? What is your name? Where are you coming from? It's the same thing. You just take that out into community and space.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because we all, like, we've grown up in this, you know, a system, in one system, you know, the Western system. And I was reminded of that so starkly. I used to be a teacher in Alice Springs, but I was reminded of it so starkly when watching that film as well, because there's the image of Juan sitting in the classroom, and it's like the sound sort of bleeds into it. And to me, it just was absolutely, that was the white noise of white culture, of Western culture, and the way that it obliterates other cultural norms. But really, when we say just ask, if you don't know, just ask, it's really about going, oh, I'm learning about a different way. And just as I like to have good manners in my own cultural paradigm, how do I demonstrate good manners in this arrangement, so that trust is formed and relationships can build.
If you and I go to a concert at Hamer Hall and someone performs, they dance, or they play, Hugh Masekela played trumpet, and I photographed him that time. You find out, you say thank you, and you acknowledge the artist. It's the same in just a normal everyday situation, like these girls perform. We acknowledge them. We see their names. We share that as an acknowledgement. And when Norm plays, we acknowledge it. It's not something we should take for granted and just say, oh, that's a welcome. Oh, that's a tokenistic didgeridoo. It's not. It's like you live and you breathe in that moment together and you acknowledge those people. It's as simple as going to a concert and just saying, that artist is here, we acknowledge them. These girls, these dancers are here, we acknowledge them. And it just seems to be something that should cross over all of those areas.
So we will move on to the next, and this is you know, possibly one of your best known shots, Ferne, or certainly most evocative. It's just, you know, glorious shot. Tell us a little bit about this.
With Archie. The name is about being with Archie, saying, I hear you, I stand with you, I walk with you, we are with you. With Archie was taken right here with this beautiful piece of nature sits in our studio. I was so humbled by him sharing with me his story that day. We spent half a day here in the studio about 5 years ago, and we did some things out in the bush out the back, but with Archie, gave me an insight into him allowing me to hear his story about the children being taken away.
And it's those things, it's really important for us, I think, for settler Australians to recognise the extraordinary damage that's done to generations and why people, particularly in places like Victoria, where actually the colonial project, which is what settlement was, we were looking at the end of Britain's movement across the world and creating empire, and that was all about finances and Britain becoming wealthy. And by the time they got to Victoria in 1835, they had had hundreds of years of working out the best way to take control of someone else's land. And so the decimation that occurred in Victoria is unlike anything that was seen.
Yeah.
It was so rapid and so total. So, and then that, to then start taking children away, to further try and, kill off a culture that's sort of standing in your way. So it's really, these conversations, we're not talking about history that is past. We're talking about intergenerational hurt. And as a nation, I very strongly feel, and I'd like to know your thoughts on this too, Ferne, as a nation, I really strongly feel that we need to recognise, white Australia needs to recognise its past.
I think we should think that.
Well, we are actually moving towards time. So
can I just acknowledge Archie for coming here and being with me here on Wadawurrung Country on that day, and also allowing me to give that space. It's not about controlling a situation, as Corrina and I discussed. Sometimes it's just about providing a space as an artist, allowing that person to be in the moment and feel safe, feel trusting that they can deliver to the camera what I need them to deliver. I said to Archie, this is not a promotional shot. This is just a story shot, and it's behind us here in the studio. And I like, for me, just personally, a reflection on that is I like how he's keeping something for himself. Because sometimes when we're torn and we're hurt and people are taking things from us, it's nice to just give ourselves something back and just hold that for him. For me, that I like that photo doesn't give everything to the viewer. It takes something back and we go inward and we feel, and I think that's why that's had success in being in the Moran Prize and various things. It's now hanging at the Deakin University in the Indigenous Koori Centre there. And it's about keeping something for yourself. So even in the sharing and the unfolding of history and prehistory and developing that connection and understanding, we've got to respect, we've got to hold space, we've got to allow our Indigenous people to hold something for themselves.
Yes, because we've taken so much. We're going to move on to the next slide, because as much as that's deeply painful, there is incredible strength in the community living on Wadawurrung Country. Corrina, who have we got here? We've got Norm again.
Yeah, Norm and Urimal here. And again, not staged or anything, Ferne, but captured emotion, captured strength, captured, two worlds. And that is, it is what it was about, bringing, many Aboriginal, non-Aboriginal people together, but Aboriginal people being in a space where they could always share their spirit, whether it was through song, playing yidaki, dance, all types of elements of music. It was a beautiful festival. We all have journeys. I share a little bit about my journey today, but the two fellas in front of us as well have their journeys and their stories as well, and the history for thousands and thousands of years of their bloodlines. And I love that too. Just they look safe in each other's arms. That's the story that tells.
And it says to me, I see you, brother.
Yeah.
And I see you back, and I hold space for you. And that, for me, is representation for Two Worlds Festival, thanks to Melissa and Cam, who ran that festival for many years and have continued to support Indigenous youth with education up for the Yolngu people in North East Arnhem Land. And that's where Urimal was from. So it's also, not only is it Two Worlds bringing non-Indigenous, Indigenous people together, but recognising that many nations of Aboriginal Indigenous places, they have their own culture, they have their own nation, they have their own stories, and they have their own sense of place. And so that is two nations holding each other.
Yeah. We'll move to the next one, Stacey. I know that we did get carried away, so we're going to have to start flicking through. That's a gorgeous image of those boys, those Yolngu boys.
Taken in the studio with Yuramal and the Yolngu boys through the connection with Cam Begg and Melissa Patterson, again at Two Worlds.
We'll keep going, Stace. And when was this one taken?
Well, we revisited after Walking on Country. We came back to the studio and this is also part of our project that we are doing, and we have done the pilot. Many of the images you've seen have also come from past projects and images, but the one that I'm doing, the pilot with Corrina, to take a walk on Wadawurrung Country to uncover what it means to our First Nations people to find reconciliation in this country. And so now we're looking at ochre being placed on the face. Corrina is facing north, and she holds her hands, and she, in her spirit, she, as you said before, some of these images are timeless, and I think they should extend beyond time, because this is something that has been passed down through generations and generations to her, from knowledge and understanding of what ochre means to be placed on the face as part of ceremony.
Well, it's that being born with a memory, isn't it? You know?
Yeah, and it brings me back to storytelling as well, of dancing for the first time with my Wadawurrung family up in Ballarat and a cousin. I hadn't danced before as much as I had the little deadly dances that I watched over. I'd never actually danced myself, and given that opportunity for the first time. And it meant so much to me, that first evening dancing, and one of my cousins, she gave me the Kunawara markings that night. The Kunawara is a black swan, and it's something that's been strongly connected to me, and it was strongly connected to me at that time too. But it's also understanding the connection, you know, with ochre to our mother and in dance. But it is also important to understand that every traditional group has different stories in ochre, different reasons, that when you see ochre as part of ceremony, that is also a way of telling story too. So it's another way of understanding, but the colours all mean something as well and tell stories.
And your jet black hair reminds me of a black swan.
Indeed. Now, I see that we're getting some nice comments coming in. What we might do, because we have got to that time where we should invite the audience in, and I should stop being greedy and, you know, hogging you both. So thank you both so much for sharing the beginnings of this project with us. Stacey, I think what we could do perhaps is if the audience has some questions, if you'd like to type them in now, and then maybe what we'll do is we'll just slowly flick through the rest of the images. Feel free, ladies, to say, oh, I want to talk about that one as we go, just so that we can show you all of the images, but also, you know, try and keep some time here. So we'll move to the next image while you're getting your questions out, and I will be quiet for a moment. And Stacey, if you want to read the questions out to our panellists, that would be wonderful.
Okay.
I love that photo of you.
Hi guys, I'm back again.
Hello.
We had some really great feedback during the session, which was just lovely. Specifically, a lot of people were really interested, Corrina, in finding out names of local places, Indigenous names of local places and areas of significance. Specifically, someone mentioned Point Addis. If you can talk about the significance of that area.
All areas are of cultural significance. It's not for me to, you know, orally share those stories, but just be mindful that all places of this coastline are of cultural significance and storytelling. Respect, appreciate, look at what's around, look at all the resources that are around, you know, look at the landscape and the environment, and what you can see. So it's important that you look with your eyes and you listen with your ears, and Country will tell you the stories of that area. I just also want to mention that we do have a Wadawurrung language app. If you have an iPad or iPhone, you can download that Wadawurrung language app intro. So it must be the intro one that you download. It's a free, but when you download it, it brings up the words and it has a speaker, and you can press on the speaker and it'll tell you. So if you want to look up a magpie, it'll tell you that the name is Pawang, and then you press the speaker and it'll help you to pronounce Pawang. Also, just to educate people that our language was not a written language. It was all oral, and we used a lot of body language. We we looked over, we used our eyes, we used our hands. We didn't need a huge language because it was connected to us, it was connected to what we heard on Country. So some people will often challenge the written language of Wadawurrung. Don't challenge it because it wasn't written. The written language we have has been written by non-Aboriginal people that first came into contact with Wadawurrung people.
Right. I know language, like as a writer myself, language is really important. I think with connecting people to something, and like just yesterday when I was walking through, well, not yesterday, the day before, when we went for a walk with my children out behind lawn through the bush out there, I kept thinking to myself, it'd be really good to know like the local names for some of these places, because it gives you just a bigger connection to things if you have some language to describe that. So yeah, that's great to know about that app, Corrina. I'll download it. There's been some really great feedback from people on Nita has just said, she said thank you, and thanks for your generosity and your artistry, Ferne. Thank you for your generosity, Corrina. But and where would you like to take your future collaboration with Ferne? She's asking.
So we're hoping we can collaborate and engage more Wadawurrung and bring the Wadawurrung. So we hope that we can have an exhibition, or we can have, the portraits of Wadawurrung for people to see. We are Wadawurrung. This is Wadawurrung. We are Wadawurrung. We are the people of this land, and this land is, they're at that connection and know Wadawurrung people.
And part of the developmental grant that I received from the City of Melbourne is also to develop. It's a developmental project, and so I'm learning the art of interviewing and recording those stories. So we have recorded that from Corrina, and the idea would be this is our pilot, and we would extend it once we know what we want to do it properly. So take the time to get it right, which applies to understanding our local Indigenous people and across Australia. But take the time to get it right with Corrina, and then we will slowly reach out to other Wadawurrung people that I've met and known over the years, but also getting to know further afield in Wadawurrung Country, which extends right up to Wyndham, out to Ballarat, down to Aries Inlet, and right around the Bellarine. So there's many Indigenous people that need to be included in this map, this story of people, and hear them, and their voices and those photographs will be displayed in a place yet to be known.
I'm hoping that we might be able to do it, at the Shire, first. Again, I have admitted I'm greedy, but we'll get back to you on that.
We had a really lovely comment from Molly, and she says, both of your words have really hit her soul. She said she thought Ferne's point about being afraid to understand is really important. And she said she thinks this brings up another point about ancestry. And Molly grew up in a heavily Celtic family, and by learning this first, connection to land through Celtic culture, there is serious empathy for Aboriginal people and their connection to land. This is the similarities across Indigenous cultures that connects us all. It isn't just about the physical land. The land is us, it is we, it is I, and it is me. Niante to you both. And I'm gonna wreck this. It's Scottish Gaelic. Tapad lit, which is thank you. Sorry, Shirley, from my ancestors to yours for your teachings. She said, sorry for the long message, but that was a beautiful message. I thought that was worth reading out.
It's interesting. I'll just quickly, we had a, before the session began, we were just having a chat about the act of smoking and then Aboriginal people, you know, dancing barefoot on the earth and things, and talking about that those, you know, the smoke, the didgeridoo, then the smoke, and then the dancing on the earth, they all bring you to that deep place of, you know, in well-being speak, we'd call it mindfulness, but it's something much, 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 much older than that.
Deep earth.
Yes, indeed. And,
Below our feet.
you know, and so, you know, the oldest surviving culture on earth, you know, 80,000 plus years. So yes, that Celtic sort of, you know, those same elements, I think we can see them in almost every spiritual practice. You know,
archetypes is something that we see through Pacific Islanders, through Celtic, Native American, Indian, African. You look at some of the artworks across the world, and we're often coming back to one space where circle often means gathering, people gathering together. There's many archetypes that come from a deep place that sometimes has no words.
I think too, though, a lot of the time people will take off from where they're living to go learn, you know, travel across the world to learn other cultures. I think it's just so important that you learn the culture of where you're living.
Yeah,
that is what's really, really important. Stories of what you're living, the language. You know, you need to understand all that of where you're living. It is here.
And what better time than 2020 COVID-19 lockdown number 2. Stacey, were there any more questions?
There were a lot of questions, but there is a lot of really lovely comments. Say Chrissy Stowe says, such humility in this space, such grounded wisdom, really appreciate you three creating this space. So that was a lovely comment. I think earlier on we had a comment from Bonnie too, just and she, I think, just wanted for us to explain that Norm was not a Wadawurrung man. And I don't know, Corrina, if you wanted to go further into that, because we had a quick chat about that this morning.
Yeah, we did have a chat about that, and everyone was educated that Norm is not a Wadawurrung man. Norm lives on Wadawurrung Country, and his Yidaki playing is a passion and spirit of him. He has grown up on Wadawurrung Country and worked in Wadawurrung Country, and has 2 children to a Wadawurrung woman.
That was it was great to have his artistry with us this morning to introduce the session.
So what is the significance, really quickly, what's the significance of, for you? Now, I mean, and cultures, all cultures are living things, you know, so things don't stay fixed. I've got deep relationships with, you know, First Nations people from Central and Western Deserts, and things do change with time. So what's the significance for you and for Norm with using the Yidaki to start ceremony?
So it's a choice by people, and when they ring and want to book that is a choice by them. The Yidaki is not a cultural practice that was part of Wadawurrung Country. The Yidaki comes from a certain tree. It's not for me to talk about because it's not women's business.
That's right.
And that was something my nan taught me at a very, very young age as well, the story around that. So it's not for me to talk, but yes, it comes from a certain tree that does not grow on Wadawurrung Country. Yeah, so it is not a tradition for us, but if people want the Yidaki as part of that, but I think, you know, for me too, it is accepting of all Aboriginal people and all of what across Australia are those strong things, and the beauty of the different landscape and what it brought, and the resources and that brings, you know, like the Yidaki.
Yeah, and that feeling of just getting to know what Wadawurrung people are and who they are and what they bring culturally it's just that information is really nice to know. What is locally traditional and what is from other nations in Australia.
So with that then, I'm going to have to start wrapping us up because obviously it's 12:30 already. Ultimately, this conversation has really drummed home for me the understanding that real reconciliation is built on relationships. individual relationships between First Nations and settler Australians, and relationships between individual and country itself. I want to thank you both so much for giving us such an intimate look at what journeying on Wadawurrung Country means for you. You've helped us understand the utmost importance of the planet and its elements for First Nations people. Knowledge that this extraordinary year in human history tells us day after day after day is vital if we're going to survive. As a species, we've become so removed from our place in the world. We're not separate from this planet. We must revere her, listen to her, and look after her. Thank you both so much for your generosity and trust in sharing this pilot project with us. Let's keep our fingers crossed that by the time NAIDOC Week comes around in November, we can all come together again to view more of the work and to celebrate living on Wadawurrung Country together. Now I'll just let you know what's coming up on Portal this week. So if you don't have any plans to get out later on this afternoon and you want to keep connecting through art, then join Auntie Bronwyn Raisin, Gunditj Mara Woman, and the Wayapawa Watnunda Marangi, or we'll come together in a meeting project. We'll be joining a weaving circle and be inspired by some wonderful First Nations weavers and use your creative license to exhibit your own works in public spaces. Over time and space, the project's hope is that woven circles will grow across the Shire, state, nation and beyond to form a network of meeting places and connections. Like the rest of regional Victoria, we're also worrying that we're going to go back into lockdown. So we invite you to join Kaz Artsy this Wednesday night for a free workshop on creating mandalas and start to use your own driveway to engage both your kids, neighbourhood and the community in some creative well-being. Don't forget to tune in this coming Thursday at 10 a.m. to hear another wonderful Surf Coast artist, children's author and illustrator Renee Tremel, read from her latest works. And I want to apologise to Steph Gremmel for last week having confused my own program in my head. And finally, however, next week we again have the privilege of spending time with Corrina, this time as she discusses the importance of ochre and water with the President of the Art Spaces Management Committee, Sally Groom. Register for that today. For details of these events, surfcoastartstrail.com.au. And we're now going to close out the session with the beautiful voices. That was probably my phone. We're now going to close out the session with the beautiful voices of 3 young girls singing Bengadeh. Corrina, can you tell us?
Yeah.
Can you tell us the meaning of this before it starts?
Yeah, so Bengadeh is a thank you. It's a song that I wrote in Wadawurrung language for Deborah Cheatham. So Deborah Cheatham runs a short black opera which consists of Aboriginal children that live down here in Wadawurrung Country, and some Wadawurrung young people are in that choir as well. This song they wanted to sing to thank Wadawurrung people and thank Wadawurrung Country for caring for them as Aboriginal young people living on Wadawurrung Country. The way Deborah Cheatham has composed this is absolutely beautiful, but these 2 voices of 2 young girls are absolutely beautiful, but their voices, they really touch you. So I want to thank Nara and Sissy for singing this and it being part of today. Sissy. So Yatni, Kanamu. Thank you.
Girls.
Love you both.
Thank you, girls.